They judged me from the first dinner, doubting my worth and love for their daughter, but I had a plan to change everything to prove them wrong in the most unexpected way. It was a test of loyalty, strength, and silent power. I want to share my story with you. I still remember the click of the front door as I stepped into a world that wasn't mine, the echo bouncing off marble floors and gilded moldings. The way their eyes flicked over my scuffed loafers and folded arms stung even before I heard the first barb. You might think I was nervous, you'd be wrong. Even that first moment with the chandelier dripping crystals above us, I felt calm, almost amused. Because I knew something they didn't, but I'm getting ahead of myself. I met Olivia at a tech conference last spring. She was wisecracking about data breaches while sipping kombucha from a mason jar, and I thought, there goes someone who actually gets it. We clicked right away. Her parents not so much. They never saw me coming. To them, I was the charity case, the self-made small-town guy who lucked into meeting their brilliant daughter. I'd smile and nod as they grilled me across the family's 10-foot mahogany dining table. Every question hidden an insult. How exactly did you sell your company? Which venture capitalist did you lean on when things got rough? Are you sure your Tesla loan is up to date? Olivia sat beside me, her hand warm on the table, but I knew she felt the sting too. Her mother, Eleanor, hovered with a wine glass like a scepter. Her father, Richard, polite but patronizing, launched into a monologue about proper investments while her brothers, twins in matching blazers, snickered at my suit's off-brand label. They called it charming, but it was the kind of charming that cuts you down to size. I remember the first course, a soup so fancy I couldn't name it, garnished with gold flakes. Eleanor raised an eyebrow at my hesitant spoonful. I suppose something so exotic feels a bit much for someone accustomed to simpler tastes, she purred, voice smooth as silk but dripping disdain. My heart did a little victory dance. I let it, because I wasn't here to prove my bank balance. I was here to test Olivia. Would she stand up to them? Would she defend me? She didn't, at least not until later. At first, she forced a polite laugh, trying to soften every blow. Under the crystal chandelier's glow, I leaned back and studied her face. The flicker of guilt when her sister Anastasia compared my used car to her Range Rover, the way her lips quivered as her father mocked my hobby project of developing educational apps. I saw her trapped between loyalty to me and dread of her family's wrath. By the second course, a fish so white it looked like it came from another planet, their jabs grew sharper. You build apps for schools? That's adorable, her mother cooed. We're just curious how you keep those nonprofits afloat. Donations from friends. Her voice spun sugar-coated poison. They didn't care about the apps. They cared that whatever money I made, they didn't control. I looked at Olivia. Her cheeks flushed. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Between us, I felt a rush of something fierce, pity for her helpless position and an urgent desire to protect her. But I knew my silence would force her to choose. She had to say something. Before she could, her brother Tristan leaned forward, glass in hand. Tell me, I'm dying to know, when you sold your company, how many millions did you actually make? 5, 10? We grew up hearing stories of our grandfather's deals. This feels like pocket change, doesn't it? He laughed, a cruel bark that echoed through the room. The twins exchanged high fives. Olivia's eyes filled with tears she desperately swallowed back. I set down my napkin, fingertip brushing the silverware, and smiled. Not a humble, meek smile, something colder, sharper, a promise. I sold for a little more than 10, I said, voice low but carried through the hall. The family froze. Silverware clattered against china. Eleanor's smile cracked. Tristan opened his mouth, but I cut him off. But this dinner isn't about me, is it? It's about proving I'm not good enough for her. Funny thing though, my standards of enough are what you think. I leaned forward, and the dull roar of the villa's heating system hummed like a countdown clock in my ears. I'm here because I love her, and I deserve to know if you love her enough to treat me fairly. The chandelier's light seemed to tremble as everyone processed my words. Olivia turned to me, her mouth open, eyes wide. I saw hope and fear war in her gaze. The room shifted. Richard pinched his brow. Eleanor's lace sleeve trembled. The twins looked uncomfortable for the first time. They had thought tonight would be another easy roast, another notch in their superiority belt. Instead, they met a man who wouldn't flinch. I could see them recalculating. I could see Olivia's relief that somebody was finally standing up. And in that moment, I realized I wasn't just here for her approval or to elevate my own pride. I had another mission, one they'd never suspect, one that would turn this family's world upside down, but they wouldn't know until the finale. Not even one hint, because the best reveals happen on center stage under the brightest lights when justice demands its moment. I leaned back, eyes locked on theirs, and waited for the next move. I couldn't shake the image of their faces after I told them I deserved fair treatment. That night, back in my rented loft with its bare bulb and peeling paint, I felt that old familiar itch, the one that drives me to dig deeper, to solve the puzzle no matter how many layers of bullshit I have to peel away. So I poured myself a glass of cheap bourbon, plugged in my laptop, and started crawling through public records, tax filings, and the kind of insider whispers you only get by tapping a couple of well-placed contacts from my startup days. It didn't take long to unearth the rot at the heart of their gilded world. I first stumbled on the balance sheets of the Harwood Institute, the local arts and culture center where the family's name is commemorated on every plaque in patrons' lounge. To everyone else, that institute is the jewel of the county, a symbol of refinement, a guarantee of pedigree whenever the Harwoods throw one of their legendary fundraisers. But on page 5 of the latest audit, red ink already outpaced the black. Their operating deficit had doubled in just 18 months, vendor invoices were going unpaid, and worst of all, their endowment fund was hemorrhaging from poorly managed investments no one had the courage to admit were toxic. At current burn rates, they had maybe 4 months before the doors shut for good. I stared at the blinking cursor like it owed me an answer. How could a family this powerful let the one thing they worship slip through their fingers? Then I remembered how they mocked my simple car, my so-called hobby projects. They had no idea I'd built my fortune by salvaging failing startups and turning them into gold mines. I saw the symmetry. They had the prestige and the PR but no real competence. I'd been underestimated all evening just as I had at that dining table. By dawn, I'd mapped out the skeleton of a plan. I would step in, but not as their charity case or some glorified creditor. I'd be the anonymous savior, the phantom patron whose gift would wipe out the Harwood Institute's debt and fund critical programs for at least a decade. All under the guise of a foundation named for someone who'd meant the world to me, someone whose loss years ago had inspired my own journey in tech philanthropy. They'd never suspect a thing until the marquee at their next gala read, presented by the Eleanor Clark Memorial Trust. Over the next few days, I watched Olivia carefully. She still hovered between pride for me and panic about her family's reaction if they discovered the truth. She kept insisting she wanted to help me research grants, but I told her it was company business and off-limits. She'd nod, disappointment flickering behind her eyes, but I had to shield her from knowing too much. This had to be my operation, down to every wire transfer and shell entity. If they thought I was behind it, they'd question my motives, see it as another power play. While they continued to demean me at social functions, throwing little jabs about my sources of income and my hobby coding, I was one step ahead. I established a nonprofit in Wyoming with no obvious ties to me. I recruited a couple of trusted legal advisors, all briefed on strict confidentiality agreements. I funneled money through cryptocurrency channels and offshore accounts until the trail was near impossible to follow. Every night, I checked the Institute's account balances. Every morning, I tasted the satisfaction of watching their deficits shrink by the hundreds of thousands. My loft became a war room, sticky notes plastered on the walls with names, dates, wire instructions. My chest tightened every time I thought about the reckoning that was coming, the moment I'd unveil the rescue and dismantle their smug superiority in one grand exorcism. But I couldn't allow impatience to ruin the plan. The Harwoods were predictable. They'd set their gala dates, start hyping the event as the social highlight of the season. That public spectacle was my opportunity. That stage was where I'd slap them with the ultimate reveal. The quiet titan they'd sneered at was the very reason their temple of prestige was still standing. I punched in final figures on a spreadsheet late one evening and leaned back, the red lines now deep in the black. It felt like watching a dying heart restart its own rhythm. At that moment, however, I realized this wasn't just about ruining the Harwoods' egos, it was redemption. Redemption for my old partner who died when we were dismantling a failing medtech startup. Redemption for the kids who couldn't afford art classes at that institute. Redemption for my younger self who once believed wealth was only about flashing numbers, not saving actual lives. My simple lifestyle, far from a disadvantage, had given me the clarity to see what really mattered. I wouldn't tell Olivia any of this yet. She needed to stand on her own when the time came to make the choice her family never offered me, defend the man she loves or bow to their expectations. But inside, I felt a surge of hope that she'd choose rightly, because I'd tested her courage from the first dinner. Now the final exam was waiting, ticking down hour by hour until the night of their gala, when the Institute's director would step forward, wipe tears from her eyes, and announce the biggest donation in the Harwood Institute's history. And then I'd watch the walls of their false empire crumble. They'd realize too late that the true power wasn't in their wealth. It was in the quiet titan they'd refused to acknowledge. I spotted the first warning sign the day the Harwoods quietly upgraded their invitations to our weekend at the Lakewood estate. Usually they'd send something that felt like a rodeo of snares. Join us for a casual barbecue. This time the envelope was thick, embossed with gold, and arrived with hand-delivered flowers. Inside, Olivia found a line that froze her smile. "We have arranged for you to meet someone special." I watched her hands tremble as she read it, her eyes darting up to mine like a bird spotting a predator. That Sunday, I drove out to Lakewood in my battered hatchback, my heart thrumming a warning beat. The house loomed on a rise, all limestone and columns. Ivanka, her cousin, greeted us at the door in a fitted white dress. She looked me up and down, offered a brittle hello. Behind her, the family was clustered in the great room, drinking champagne from flutes as if they'd already won. I could smell the tension in Olivia before I saw it. She gripped my arm, her knuckles whitening. Her father, Richard, cleared his throat and gestured toward a man standing off to the side, tall, impeccably dressed, with a Rolex peeking from under his cuff and a smirk that said, "I know I'm rich." "Olivia," he said, voice oily as spilled wine, "this is Daniel Carlisle. Daniel's just closed on a hedge fund that's been the talk of Wall Street. I thought you two might hit it off." He didn't offer Daniel a name, just expected us to applaud. Daniel gave Olivia a polite nod. His eyes flicked to me, saw my second-hand jacket, and registered the loser tag. Olivia's face drained of color. I stepped forward anyway. "Nice to meet you," I said, extending a hand. Daniel took it, his grip cool and practiced. We shook, and I let my fingers squeeze a beat longer than polite. Daniel's eyes flickered, confusion, surprise, maybe a little envy. Good, something in him knew I wasn't just a peasant for the evening. "That's kind of you," Daniel said. His tone was neutral, studied. "I hear you're an app developer." He glided past me and offered Olivia a champagne flute. She accepted it, voice barely above a whisper, "Thank you." The family retreated to a private corner, sipping, chuckling, prodding. I stayed close to Olivia, my voice low. "How are you holding up?" She shook her head, pressed a hand to her mouth. "They said if I don't move on, they'll stop funding my graduate studies." Her voice cracked. "They said I could have his trust fund instead." I felt the familiar sting of both pride and pain. Pride that she'd stuck by me this far, pain that she was being tortured for it. Around us, the lake glistened, the summer sun warm on my neck. It felt like the world was showing off while I clenched my fists. Later, I found them orchestrating a chance encounter. Olivia and Daniel by the dock, Daniel complimenting her dress, asking about her thesis. The way he leaned in, offering assurances about future stability, was a deliberate move. I could almost hear the family's puppeteer strings. I turned away but remained within earshot. Daniel said, "If you ever want someone who appreciates real security, I'm here." Olivia tried to laugh it off, but she was shaking. Then she snapped, "You don't know me." Her voice was firmer, more like the woman I fell for. Daniel smiled condescendingly, "Exactly." That night I stayed silent at dinner. The family watched me, waiting for any sign of weakness. Olivia caught my eye across the table. I offered a subtle nod, solidarity. She swallowed hard and reached for my hand under the table. Her fingers curled around mine, and she exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for days. After dessert, in the hallway lined with ancestral portraits, her mother cornered Olivia. "Sweetheart," she cooed, voice cold, "you need to think about your future. People our class don't marry up, they marry smarter. You deserve someone who can give you everything without strings attached." She paused, smiled thinly. "Think it over before tomorrow." In that moment, Olivia's shoulders slumped. I watched her flick her eyes to me, tears pooling. I stepped forward, heart pounding with a mix of fury and tenderness. "You okay?" I asked, voice quiet but intense. She nodded, but her eyes said the opposite. I swallowed a warning. This was the crossroads. She could walk away from me to save her studies, her social safety net, or she could stand by me, embrace the unknown. There was no middle ground. Before she could answer, her father appeared in the doorway, face a mask. "Olivia," he said, "time to decide." He looked at me, disdain clear as day. "I suggest you choose wisely." They turned and left, sealing her fate if she didn't act. Olivia closed her eyes, pressed her forehead against the cool wall, and finally let the tears come. I wrapped my arms around her and held her close. "I won't let them take you from me," I whispered. She pulled back, looked up at me, swollen-eyed and resolute. "I don't know if I have the strength." I brushed a tear from her cheek. "You have more strength than all of them combined, but you won't have to face them alone." Her lips trembled. "Promise me you won't abandon me if I can't do this." "I'll never abandon you," I said, voice firm. "We'll face them together no matter what happens tomorrow." As we stood in that dim hallway, the family's voices drifting from the ballroom behind us, I felt the vice tighten. Tomorrow would be the ultimate test for her loyalty and for the timing of my rescue plan. The countdown had begun, and I knew that once the hammer fell, nothing would ever be the same. The invitation arrived in a velvet envelope stamped with the Harwood crest. Inside, their flowery script read, "You and Olivia are cordially invited to the annual Harwood Institute Gala." Olivia showed it to me with a forced smile. I saw the flicker in her eyes. She knew this was the bait and I was the carcass. The night of the gala, the compound was a glittering spectacle. Tents draped in silk, crystal chandeliers strung from towering oaks, and valet signs directing guests to display their most ostentatious cars. I drove my hatchback into the back lot, parked beside a row of Ferraris and Bentleys, and felt the familiar surge of amusement. They'd given me a golden ticket just to watch me squirm. Inside, the ballroom was a sea of gowns and tuxedos. A jazz trio murmured on a raised dais. Beneath their melody, guests networked like sharks. Every so often someone waved at me with a patronizing grin. I caught bits of whispered commentary. Didn't he sell that app to a hedge fund? Looks like he found time to scrape together a suit. They all assumed I was here to network or beg for scraps. They didn't know the real reason I was under those lights. Olivia appeared at my side looking radiant in emerald green. Her hand brushed mine and I felt her tremble. "They'll do something tonight," she warned. "I know it." I nodded, heart hammering, because I'd seen the events planned, a staged reveal of their generous benefactor who'd pledged a last-minute seven-figure donation. They'd make a show of thanking that person, then point out the benefactor's origins to remind everyone I wasn't one of them. The final insult before they forced her decision. We threaded through clusters of silver-haired matrons and banker types. Her cousin Ivanka drifted by, inclining her head toward me. "Enjoying the ambience charity case?" she purred. I smiled and tipped my head. "It's exquisite." Her jaw twitched. I wondered if she suspected anything. Probably not. A bell rang and the Institute's director took the stage, applauded by the room. She gave a glowing speech, recounting the Institute's mission, its triumphs, and its perilous financial state. The chandelier lights dimmed and whispers rippled through the crowd. "Here's to the savior who stepped in just in time," the director said. A spotlight clicked on, shining on an empty chair at center stage. A hush fell as everyone waited. I saw Olivia's breath catch. She gripped my arm, fear in her eyes. I put a finger to my lips. The cruelest moment was coming. The director continued, "Our anonymous patron has requested that we reserve the grandest honor for their moment of unveiling. So please join me in imagining a future where the Harwood Institute thrives for generations thanks to a gift beyond measure." Thunderous applause erupted. They expected the benefactor to storm the stage, bask in the glory, then savor the gasps when their identity was revealed. Instead, nothing happened. Just the sound of the trio playing off-key jazz, the guests shifting uneasily. Olivia's parents exchanged glances, confusion flickering in their practiced masks. The director cleared her throat. "It seems our guest of honor is fashionably late." Laughter rippled. Eleanor Harwood's lips curved in a practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. She rose and issued a soft, "Well, let's not keep our esteemed crowd waiting." She lifted her glass. "To the Harwood Institute's future, may it be brighter than its past." She drained her champagne, a final jab at the phantom patron. A murmur ran through the room. Who could it be? I saw wealthy old friends glance around. Speculation buzzed. A few, those who hated the Harwoods, smiled knowingly, waiting for the joke to land. They'd rise to mock the benefactor's absence. Olivia stood frozen, tears brimming. Her father placed a hand on her shoulder, forcing her smile. I loosened my tie, moved through the crowd to the back exit. I slipped into the night, my heart a coil of purpose. In the shadows by the service doors, I pulled out my phone, typed a short message. "Now." I pressed send and slipped deeper into darkness. Minutes later, the gala's jazz trio was drowned out by the roar of distant generators. Floodlights snapped on across the grounds, bathing the mansion in stark white. The giant projection screen at the lawn's edge flickered to life, the Harwood crest morphing into the logo of the Eleanor Clark Memorial Trust. The guests, curtsied in and tuxedoed up, spilled out onto the terrace in confusion. On the screen, a video montage played images of children learning in art classes, surgeons using institute facilities for groundbreaking research, families strolling museum halls. A voiceover recounted the near collapse of the institute, the secrets of its ignored deficits, and the timely intervention of a philanthropist who valued heart over heritage. Then the camera panned to a simple message. "With gratitude, your anonymous benefactor." A hush fell. I watched the crowd's faces contort, envy, shock, humiliation, realization dawning that they'd humiliated the very man who saved them. In the center, Olivia's mother staggered, her graceful composure shattered. Olivia clasped her hands over her mouth, tears streaming. Her father's face went ashen. And I stood in the shadows, heart thundering, as their world tilted off its axis. I sat alone in the backstage green room, the murmur of the gala drifting through the half-closed door like distant thunder. My laptop glowed on the small table in front of me, spreadsheets and encrypted chat windows layered like battlefield maps. Tonight was the night everything locked into place. My heart pulsed with an electric calm. I'd spent weeks lining up escrow accounts, drafting legal agreements, and briefing the Institute's board under pseudonyms. Now it was time for the final act. I took a deep breath and clicked open the secured banking portal. On the screen, the Harwood Institute's balance sheet loomed in red. I entered my instructions, one transfer to cover the overdue debts, another to replenish the endowment, and a third to underwrite future programs, arts scholarships, medical research grants, community outreach. I typed in the wire details for an offshore trust that carried the name Eleanor Clark Memorial Trust, then added a final note in the memo field, for hope's sake. With one more click, the funds began their silent journey through digital corridors I'd lined with anonymity. I closed the laptop and leaned back, letting the weight of it all settle. The numbers ran high, enough to erase every warning letter, renegotiate vendor contracts, and set up a 10-year financial plan. My simple lifestyle, my battered hatchback, and my early startup failures had all been training grounds for this. I'd poured everything I had into becoming more than the sum of my humble origins. Now, the Institute's future would be rewritten overnight. Footsteps echoed in the hallway, and a man holding a monogrammed leather binder slipped inside. He wasn't dressed like a gala guest. He was lean in a tailored suit that didn't flash wealth, his eyes sharp and steady. The board's legal advisor, the one I'd tapped for confidentiality. He handed me a folded sheaf of paper stamped with official seals and signatures. "All signed," he said quietly. Not a question asked, not a detail leaked. I nodded and slid the documents into my jacket pocket. He glanced at the closed door, his voice lower. "The board's in on it. They'll announce your gift tonight precisely at the climax of the evening's program. They're sworn to secrecy and we've got airtight non-disclosure agreements in place. Tomorrow morning they release the statement." The advisor's words hummed like a secret handshake. I offered a small, genuine smile. "Thank you for being part of this." He nodded, straightened his tie, and slipped back into the corridor, disappearing like a whisper. Alone again, I placed my hand over my chest and felt the steady thunder of my pulse. This moment crystallized everything I'd worked for, proving to Olivia that love and integrity outweighed lineage and gold, honoring the memory of Eleanor Clark, whose portrait I'd never known but whose vision for community resilience had guided me, dismantling the Harwood's arrogance without a sword, only with truth and generosity. I checked my watch, 15 minutes until the scheduled announcement. Through the crack in the door, I could see staff in crisp black uniforms escorting late guests into the banquet hall, their champagne flutes tinkling. I could hear the string quartet warming up by the stage. I could almost sense Olivia moving through the guests, her emerald gown shimmering under the chandelier's glow. My chest tightened with anticipation. I picked up the leather binder and held it close as if it were another heartbeat. In an hour, the board chairman would rise, clear his throat, and acknowledge the mystery benefactor. His speech would crescendo with the reveal of the name on the donation letter, Eleanor Clark Memorial Trust. Then the projection screen would flare to life, showing program outlines funded by the gift, the new pediatric wing, the rotating art exhibits, the scholarship endowment for underserved students. Gasps would ripple through the hall, whispers would explode into confusion and awe, and beneath it all, a tremor of righteous justice. I pressed my back against the wall and closed my eyes for a moment, letting the silence swell. The family who'd sneered at my scuffed loafers would realize I was the one holding the keys to their social empire. But more importantly, the community that depended on that institution would breathe easier for generations. That was worth more than any spotlight or toast. The door handle turned and a staffer poked his head in. "Sir, the chairman would like you in the wings. He's ready for your cue." I rose, smoothing down my jacket. My reflection in the dark window showed a calm man who had tasted both scorn and triumph. I tucked the binder under my arm and stepped through the door into the dim corridor leading to the stage. As I walked past the final dressing room mirror, I whispered to my own reflection, "This is for you, Eleanor Clark, and for us all." The corridor lights cast long shadows, but I felt a sudden clarity, a conviction that tonight would be remembered not for old money or new wealth, but for an act of silent heroism. I emerged beside the stage entrance and paused. Through the curtains, I could glimpse the gala's grand ballroom in full swing, joyous chatter, poised laughter, crystal flashes. In a few minutes, the chairman would call for attention, the music would hush, and I would become the anonymous savior, the quiet titan who rewrote their story. My heart raced. It was time. I stepped through the mirrored doors into the ballroom and felt the current shift against me like a cold front rolling in. The chatter died just long enough for a hush of recognition to ripple through the crowd. Crystal chandeliers glinted overhead, but all I saw were the rows of judgmental faces. I kept my chin level and my gait steady, each footfall a quiet declaration that I belonged here as much as any of them. In truth, I'd never felt more aware of their stares. Me in an off-brand suit, the sole emblem of my self-made past glaring back at every well-heeled guest. A woman in a fur stole paused mid-conversation, leaned toward her companion, and whispered so my ears caught every syllable. "Isn't that him?" The companion smirked, eyes narrowing. "He's got chutzpah walking in here." Their laughter tinkled like broken glass. I didn't break my stride. Instead, I scanned the room until I found Olivia near the grand piano, her back turned, shoulders slightly hunched. I threaded through groups of investors and socialites, all tossing me sideways glances as though they expected me to trip on the red carpet. Each insult felt like a fresh brand, but still, I stepped forward. When I reached her, she turned, lips parted like she wanted to speak but couldn't find words. Her eyes held worry and guilt. I offered a small, reassuring smile, silent comfort in a room filled with noise. Her hand slipped into mine and I could feel her heartbeat flutters matching mine. We stood close, almost hidden behind a cluster of tables dripping with hors d'oeuvres. The salmon canapes looked delicate under the glow of candlelight, but I hardly noticed. My focus was entirely on her, the space between us charged like a live wire. Before I could say anything, her father swept through the gathered guests, his tailored tuxedo almost militaristic in precision. He stopped in front of us and planted his hands on his hips. His gaze flicked between Olivia and me like a judge weighing a verdict. "Well, you too," he said, voice smooth but ice cold. "I hope you're enjoying yourselves." He smiled, but the warmth died in his eyes. I nodded politely. "Thank you for the invitation." It felt like admitting I needed their permission to breathe. Her mother appeared at his elbow, draping a silk shawl over one arm. "We wanted you here to see what society really expects," she purred, her lips curving in that practiced way that said she took pleasure in inflicting pain. "Of course, we understand these gatherings can be overwhelming for someone without the right pedigree." She let the words hang like smoke. My stomach clenched. Instead of responding, I glanced toward the dais where the board chairman was about to take the stage. A cousin drifted by, Anastasia, dripping in diamonds. She paused too near, lowered her voice. "Nice of you to join us, Mr. Charity. Did you manage to scrounge up the funds for a ticket?" She laughed. The sound was brittle. I stared at her, pulse quickening. I imagined telling her exactly how I arranged every cent she'd be celebrating tonight, but I bit my tongue. If I engaged now, the moment would slip. I needed to stay calm, anonymous, unflappable. Olivia squeezed my hand, her nails digging in. Her eyes begged forgiveness or rescue. I leaned toward her, voice soft. "Just breathe, I've got us." She nodded but didn't look convinced. Behind her parents, I could see her younger brother whispering to his date, pointing at me and mouthing something. The public humiliation they'd planned was already unfolding, and it was glorious in its cruelty. At that moment, the chairman cleared his throat on the stage. The orchestra's violin slipped into silence, candles flickered, and the crowd hushed in anticipation. The chairman lifted a glass and tapped it. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, voice resonant. "Thank you for joining us this evening to support the Harwood Institute. However, before we commence our program, let us acknowledge those who make this wonder possible." His gaze swept the room, pausing momentarily on the empty center chairs reserved for tonight's honoree. A ripple of amused whispers swept through the guests. Olivia's parents exchanged confident smiles. They'd already scripted the punchline. I felt Olivia's hand tremble in mine. Her father took a step closer, tone sharpening like a blade. "Why don't you slip away to the terrace, dear? This might be a bit much for you." He pointed toward a side door. It wasn't a suggestion, it was an order. The crowd's attention was fixed on the stage, but I could feel their eyes turning back to me, brimming with anticipation of my exit. I squared my shoulders, placed a steadying hand on Olivia's back, and said softly for her ears only, "This is exactly where I need to be." As her father's smirk widened, I let go of her hand and took that step toward the center of the room. Every gaze followed me. The final insult was about to land, but so was my moment to stand firm. The tension in the hall was electric, hanging over us like a storm cloud, and I was ready to face it head-on. I waited in the spotlight's fringe, heart hammering so loudly I was sure everyone could hear it. The moment the chairman lifted his glass to silence the room felt like diving off a cliff into pure anticipation. But before he could speak again, the room darkened except for a lone beam on the podium. I realized it wasn't him. They'd slipped away, and the Institute's director, Dr. Marisol Vega, stepped forward. Her usual composed smile was gone, replaced by something weighty and grave. She cleared her throat, and a hush fell so deep I could almost hear my own breath. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, voice steady but trembling at the corners, "I have a confession. The Harwood Institute is on the brink of collapse." A gasp rose through the crowd like the first tremor of an earthquake. Silk dresses rustled, champagne glasses clinked in uncertain hands. I felt Olivia press against me, her fingers like icicles on my palm. Dr. Vega continued, her eyes bright under the chandelier's glow. "Vendor invoices went unpaid. Our endowment dwindled faster than any of us realized. If we hadn't secured emergency funding before last week, we would have closed our doors for good." The room shifted. I saw the Harwood parents' faces drain of color, their carefully built empire threatened by the truth. I saw whispers ricochet like ricochets off the polished marble. I watched Olivia's mother, Elinor, place her hand on her husband's arm, her back rigid. Her husband, Richard, opened his mouth as if to refute the director's words, but no sound came. They'd lost control of the narrative they'd manipulated for so long. In that moment, I felt a surge of something fierce, vindication for every insult they'd thrown at me, for every sneer at my simple job. Dr. Vega raised a hand to still the murmur. But tonight, I stand before you with the greatest relief of my career, because last night a single donor stepped forward. She paused, eyes sweeping across the room. A donor who values our mission more than society's hierarchy. A donor who believes that art, education, and medicine should be accessible to everyone, not just the privileged few. A hush of reverent silence. The violins began a gentle prelude. I felt my pulse spike as she said, "This donor has pledged 8 figures, enough to erase our debts, rebuild our endowment, and launch our next decade of programs." My breath caught, Olivia's jaw dropped as if struck. The guests leaned forward. A few anxious Harwood loyalists began to frown, realizing they were about to be bested by someone they'd scorned. Dr. Vega smiled then, a brilliant light cutting through the gloom. "This gift comes from the Eleanor Clark Memorial Trust, named in honor of a remarkable woman who dedicated her life to community service." A row of cameras clicked as the words echoed. "And now, I'd like to invite the benefactor to join me on stage." A murmur thundered through the hall. The chairman, recovered from his earlier confusion, stepped forward beside Dr. Vega. He gestured toward the side passages. "Please, if you're here, we'd be honored to recognize you." They scanned the crowd, uncertain. Eleanor Harwood swallowed hard, her smile strained. Richard's lips parted, horrified. Ivanka's jeweled hand flew to her throat. I stepped off the fringe, every fiber of my being guiding me toward the stage. Gasps followed me like a wave. Olivia's eyes widened, her hand darting toward mine. My stomach roiled with a mix of dread and triumph. When I reached the podium steps, the chatter fell away. All eyes snapped to me. I climbed the 3 steps, each one louder than the last in my head. Dr. Vega reached out and offered me a microphone. I took it, fingers trembling around the metal. The ballroom was a vacuum of silence. Even the quartet had stopped. I swallowed, cleared my throat. The spotlight felt like a hot sun on my face. I met Dr. Vega's gaze, grateful for her steady nod. Then I turned to face the crowd. "I'm honored," I said, voice low but carrying, "and humbled." Every eye was on me, some in disbelief, some in envy, some finally in respect. Olivia's parents looked like statues carved from ice. I swallowed again, the words I'd rehearsed cutting through the tension like a blade. "I built my first company in a garage. I learned the hard way that success is not just measured in dollars, but in lives changed." My gaze flicked to Olivia, standing proud behind me. Eleanor Clark was someone who taught me that lesson. Her vision inspired me to give back. A soft warmth spread through me as I continued. "This gift isn't about proving my worth to an old money family or buying a place at their table. It's about securing the future of an institution that belongs to the entire community." I let my words settle over them. Then I finished. "Thank you, Dr. Vega, thank you to the board, and thank you, Olivia, for believing in me." Silence reigned a heartbeat longer before applause broke out, tentative at first, then swelling into a roar. I glanced back at Olivia, tears in her eyes, and stepped down as the director enveloped me in a grateful embrace. Behind me, the Harwood family stood frozen, their last insult washed away in the flood of admiration for the anonymous savior they never saw coming. The moment I stepped up to the microphone, time flattened. A single droplet of champagne arced through the air, frozen in headlights. Glasses slipped from trembling hands, shattering like echoes of the Harwoods' arrogance. The ballroom fell into a stunned hush so deep it felt like the earth itself had paused to listen. I saw faces drained of color, matriarchs in sequins, debonair tycoons, even the Institute's most staunch supporters, every eye trained on me. I cleared my throat, acutely aware that my simple words would carry farther than any high society toast. "Good evening," I began, voice calm but resonant. "I'm overwhelmed by your reaction, but more than that, I'm humbled to stand here tonight." The chandeliers glittered overhead, but I wasn't dazzled by them. My gaze swept the room and settled on Olivia's face, her eyes shining with disbelief, her lips trembling with pride. My heart pounded with gratitude. I glanced at the shattered flutes on the carpet, then back to the crowd. "I didn't come from your world of pedigree and privilege. I come from a place where we measured success by whether someone could access a life-saving treatment or a chance to learn a new skill. That's what this institute means to me and to everyone who walks through its doors." I paused, letting the words sink in. I saw the Harwood twins exchange guilty glances, their perfect manners evaporating. "My gift tonight isn't a show of power," I continued, voice steadier now. "It's a commitment to a community that deserves more than empty praise. It's a promise that art, education, and medicine will never be out of reach because they're considered secondary to the lineage of one family." A ripple of murmurs swept the room, approval, relief, astonishment. It was my turn to watch them, just as they'd watched me for months. I lowered the mic slightly. Power isn't about who can buy the most expensive car or control the guest list at a gala. Power is about impact, about lifting people up when they're on the brink, about leaving the world better than you found it. I could feel the weight of my own words changing the air around us. The so-called elite were suddenly heir to a different definition of influence, one they'd long ignored. I let silence bloom before I spoke again. The Harwood Institute belongs to every family it serves, not just to those who can afford the finest gowns or claim the oldest names. Tonight it belongs to all of you and to the countless lives we'll touch moving forward. My gaze found Olivia's again. Her chin lifted, determination brightening her eyes. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Behind me I heard footsteps, the soft echo of stiletto heels against marble. I turned to see Olivia stepping through the scattering of spilled champagne. She wore her emerald gown like armor. Her parents rose, stiff as statues, their expressions a blend of fury and disbelief. Olivia paused, hand over her heart, and drew a steady breath. "I want to say something," she announced, voice clear and strong. The room held its breath. Even her mother's painted lips parted in surprise. Olivia moved to my side, taking my hand. "For months, they've called you a charity case, a hobbyist, someone unworthy of even basic respect." She paused, looking out at her family as if seeing them for the first time. "But I've seen your work, how you built something from nothing, how you sacrificed comfort for authenticity, how you never needed their approval to do what was right." Her voice warmed with conviction. She turned back to me, eyes shining. "I choose you." A single sentence that settled the debate once and for all. A murmur of approval broke out, some guests standing, others nodding. Olivia squeezed my hand, and for the first time I felt the full weight of both of our journeys converge into that one moment. Her parents rose, but it wasn't to protest. They hesitated, mouths opening, closing. Their power plays had crumbled in the face of genuine love and purpose. The room shifted as the guests turned back to the stage, applauding not the Harwoods, but the man they'd tried to humiliate and the woman who chose him anyway. I stepped forward, gently guiding Olivia with me. I lifted the microphone one last time. "Thank you, everyone," I said, voice filled. "This isn't my victory alone. It's ours, the Institute's, Olivia's, and every single person who believes in doing good simply because it is right." A wave of applause washed through the hall, warmer and more sincere than any I'd witnessed before. In that moment, I realized I had done more than win her heart or save an institution. I had redefined what real power means in their world. It wasn't about ancestry or bank balances. It was about legacy, one built on compassion, not entitlement. And standing there hand in hand with Olivia, I knew we were the new rulers of that realm. A realm where the quiet titan triumphed over gilded vultures, where kindness outshone arrogance, and where the true measure of greatness was the lives you changed.